On a chilly autumn morning in Chicago, the sun struggled to break through heavy gray clouds. The city's streets were alive with the sound of cars, chatter, and the occasional barking of a dog. Jason Carter, a millionaire and the CEO of Carter Enterprises, sat in the back seat of his black sedan, skimming through notes for an important meeting. His sharp blue eyes were glued to his tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. Jason had always been a man of focus and determination. Growing up in a small town with nothing but big dreams, he had worked tirelessly to build his empire. Emotions were things he tucked away, buried under his relentless drive for success. But today, something unusual was about to happen. The car stopped at a red light near Grant Park. Jason glanced up from his tablet, his gaze landing on a young girl sitting alone on a bench. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, her thin frame wrapped in a tattered jacket that looked 2 sizes too big. Her curly brown hair was tangled, and her cheeks were red from the cold. She clutched a small teddy bear to her chest, her eyes scanning the busy street as if searching for someone. Jason frowned. Why was the child sitting alone in the cold? He tried to look away, but the image of her shivering lingered in his mind. A strange feeling stirred in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time: concern. The light turned green, and the car started moving. "Wait," Jason said abruptly, startling his driver, Mike. "Pull over." Mike obeyed, parking the car near the curb. Jason stepped out, feeling the sharp wind bite at his face. He approached the bench cautiously, not wanting to scare the girl. "Hi there," he said, his voice softer than usual. The girl looked up, her wide brown eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. She clutched her teddy bear tighter but didn't say anything. Jason crouched down to her level. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl hesitated before answering. "I don't have any," she said quietly. Her voice trembled, but not as much as her small hands. Jason felt a pang in his chest. He glanced around, searching for any sign of someone who might be looking for her. But the streets bustled with people who seemed oblivious to the child sitting there. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emily, where are you staying?" She looked down at her worn sneakers, her silence answering his question. Jason's mind raced. He wasn't sure why, but he couldn't just leave her there. Without thinking it through, he extended his hand. "Come on. Let's get you somewhere warm." Emily hesitated but eventually took his hand, her small fingers trembling in his. Jason led her to the car, where Mike's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "She's coming with us," Jason said firmly. As they drove to Jason's penthouse, Emily stared out the window, her expression a mix of awe and uncertainty. She had never been inside a car so nice, and the city outside looked entirely different from the warmth of the leather seats. Jason glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Emily nodded slowly. When they arrived, Jason led her inside his sprawling penthouse, where the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the Chicago skyline. Emily's eyes widened as she took in the luxurious surroundings, the sleek furniture, the gleaming kitchen, and the soft carpet under her feet. "You can stay here for now," Jason said, his voice awkward as if he wasn't used to offering kindness. "Let me get you something to eat." Emily stood frozen, clutching her teddy bear. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice small but curious. Jason paused, unsure how to answer. "Finally," he said, "because I know what it's like to be alone." Jason stepped into the kitchen, his mind racing. He opened the fridge, pulling out a carton of milk and a loaf of bread from the pantry. Toast and milk weren't much, but they would be warm and filling. As he moved, he glanced back at Emily, who was still standing by the door, clutching her teddy bear as if it were her only lifeline. "Come on, Emily. Sit," he called gently, motioning to the dining table. She shuffled over hesitantly, her sneakers barely making a sound on the polished hardwood floor. Jason placed a plate of toast and a glass of milk in front of her. She eyed it warily before picking up a slice and nibbling at the corner. As she ate, Jason sat across from her, watching silently. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the faint bruises on her wrists. He wanted to ask questions, but something about the way she clung to her teddy bear told him to wait. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the sleeve of her oversized jacket. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "You're welcome," Jason replied. "You can have as much as you want, okay?" Emily nodded but didn't say more. Jason leaned back in his chair, unsure what to do next. He wasn't used to children, let alone one who seemed so broken. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you have anyone? A relative? A friend?" Emily shook her head. "It's just me and Mr. Bear." She hugged her teddy tightly. Jason's throat tightened. "What about school? Don't you go to school?" Emily hesitated, then shook her head again. "Not anymore. After my mom went away, I couldn't." Jason felt a stab of guilt for pressing her. "I see," he said quietly. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Are you going to make me leave?" Jason's heart ached at her words. He shook his head. "No, Emily. You can stay here as long as you need." For the first time, Emily smiled, a small, hesitant smile that barely reached her eyes, but was enough to soften Jason's usual stern expression. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she asked after a moment. Jason sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Because sometimes people need a little help, and I think you deserve it." Emily didn't respond, but her grip on Mr. Bear loosened slightly as if she were starting to feel just a little bit safer. Jason glanced at his watch. He had a meeting in less than an hour, a meeting that could determine the future of one of his biggest projects. But as he looked at Emily, sitting at his table with her messy curls and uncertain smile, he couldn't bring himself to leave. "Do you want to watch something?" he asked, moving toward the massive TV in the living room. Emily nodded, her smile growing just a fraction. Jason turned on the TV, flipping through channels until he landed on a cartoon. Emily's face lit up, and she settled onto the plush couch, hugging Mr. Bear as she watched. As Jason stood by the doorway, he felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in a long time, his house felt less like a cold, empty space and more like home. Jason stood watching Emily for a few moments longer, her giggles at the cartoon filling the penthouse with a warmth it hadn't felt in years. He didn't realize how much he had missed such simple sounds. With a deep breath, he moved to his home office, though his thoughts remained with the little girl on the couch. He sat at his desk, opening his laptop to review the presentation slides for his meeting. The words and numbers blurred before his eyes as his mind replayed the image of Emily's thin frame and cautious smile. Questions buzzed in his head. How had she ended up on that bench? What had happened to her mother? His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Mike, his driver. "Jason, just a heads up," Mike began. "The press caught wind of your little act of kindness this morning. A few photographers were around, and they're asking questions about the girl. What do you want me to tell them?" Jason rubbed his temple. He hadn't considered how quickly his actions would attract attention. "Say nothing for now. I'll handle it later," he said, his tone firm. "Understood, boss," Mike replied before hanging up. Jason leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had dealt with high-stakes business deals and media scrutiny countless times, but this felt different. Protecting Emily from the world's prying eyes seemed far more important than any corporate negotiation. He returned to the living room, where Emily was now lying on her stomach, completely absorbed in the cartoon. "Emily," he called softly. She turned to look at him, her big brown eyes curious. "How about we get you cleaned up and find some new clothes?" he suggested. Emily hesitated, clutching Mr. Bear. "Will you stay close?" Jason nodded. "I'll be right here." She followed him to a guest bathroom, her steps tentative. Jason opened the closet, pulling out a set of fluffy towels. "You can take a bath here," he said, turning on the water to let it warm up. Emily stood at the doorway, watching him. "I haven't had a bath in a long time," she murmured. Jason paused, his chest tightening at her words. He turned to her with a small smile. Well, today's the day. Take your time. When you're done, I'll have something nice for you to wear. While Emily bathed, Jason called his assistant, Sarah. Sarah, I need a favor, he said. Of course, Mr. Carter. What do you need? Head to the nearest department store and pick up clothes for a 9-year-old girl. Everything, shirts, pants, jackets, shoes. And get some toys, too. There was a pause on the other end. A 9-year-old girl? Jason sighed. Yes. I'll explain later. Just make it happen. Understood, Sarah replied, though her voice was tinged with curiosity. By the time Emily emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel and her curls damp, Sarah had arrived with bags of new clothes. These are for you, Jason said, holding up a soft sweater and a pair of jeans. Emily's eyes widened as she reached out to touch the fabric. For me, she whispered. Jason nodded. All yours. Emily dressed quickly, her face lighting up as she looked down at the clean, warm clothes. She twirled once, hugging Mr. Bear tightly. Thank you, she said, her voice stronger this time. Jason smiled. You're welcome. As they returned to the living room, Jason's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sarah. Mr. Carter, I think you should know, the press is digging deeper into this story. They're speculating about who the girl is. If you want to keep this private, we need a plan. Jason frowned. The last thing he wanted was for Emily's face to end up on the news. He glanced at her, now sitting cross-legged on the couch, exploring a set of crayons Sarah had brought. I'll deal with it, Jason said firmly. He hung up and turned his attention back to Emily. Hey, Emily, would you like to stay here for a while longer? Emily looked up, her expression cautious but hopeful. Can I? Jason nodded. As long as you want. For the first time, she smiled fully, her eyes sparkling. Then, yes, please. Jason felt a warmth spread through him. He didn't know how long this arrangement would last, but for now, he was determined to make sure Emily felt safe and cared for. That night, Jason found himself sitting in his home office, staring out at the city lights while Emily slept in the guest room down the hall. He had left the door slightly ajar, just in case she needed anything. The normally quiet penthouse felt different now, almost alive with her presence. He had made arrangements for his personal security team to keep reporters away, but he knew it was only a temporary fix. Questions would keep coming, and he needed answers of his own. Emily's situation wasn't just a curiosity, it was a mystery he felt responsible for solving. Jason picked up his phone and dialed another number. Detective Harris, he said when the line connected. I need a favor. Harris, a longtime family friend and private investigator, chuckled. Jason, you calling me at this hour can only mean trouble. What's going on? Jason explained briefly about Emily, keeping his voice low. I need to know if anyone's looking for her. Family, foster system, anything. There was a pause. I'll see what I can dig up, Harris said. But you need to be careful. If this girl's situation involves the system, there could be legal complications. I'm not looking to break the law, Jason replied firmly. I just want to help her. Understood. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Jason hung up, leaning back in his chair. He had built his life on solving problems, but this felt entirely different. There were no contracts, no profits, just a little girl who needed someone to care. The next morning, Jason woke up early and found Emily already awake, sitting on the couch with Mr. Bear in her lap. She was staring out the window at the city below. Good morning, Jason said as he approached. Emily turned and smiled softly. Good morning. Did you sleep well? She nodded. It was the best sleep I've had in a long time. Jason's heart ached at her words, but he kept his tone light. That's good to hear. Are you hungry? I can make pancakes. Her eyes lit up. Pancakes? Really? Really, Jason replied with a chuckle. As he cooked, Emily sat at the kitchen counter, watching him with curiosity. You're not like other grown-ups, she said suddenly. Jason glanced at her. What do you mean? You don't act like you're too busy. Most grown-ups don't have time to talk to me or care about what I want, she explained, her voice matter-of-fact but tinged with sadness. Jason paused, flipping a pancake onto a plate. Well, maybe they just don't know how important you are, he said. Emily tilted her head, studying him. Do you think I'm important? Jason set the plate in front of her, meeting her gaze. I know you are. For a moment, Emily looked like she might cry, but she quickly smiled and took a big bite of her pancake. Later that day, Jason received a call from Harris. Stepping into his office, he answered quickly. What did you find? Harris's tone was serious. It's a complicated situation, Jason. Emily's mother, Angela, passed away 6 months ago. No record of a father. It looks like Emily was placed in foster care but ran away a few weeks ago. Jason's grip tightened on the phone. Ran away? Why? There's no clear record, but the system isn't perfect. Kids like her can fall through the cracks, end up in rough situations. She probably felt safer on the streets than wherever she was placed. Jason's jaw clenched. So, no one's looking for her? Not exactly, Harris replied. The foster system flagged her as missing, but cases like this don't always get the attention they deserve. If she stays with you, though, it could raise questions. Jason exhaled slowly. Thanks, Harris. Keep me updated if you find anything else. When he returned to the living room, Emily was playing with the crayons Sarah had brought, her face peaceful as she focused on her drawing. Jason sat down next to her, unsure how much to tell her about what he had learned. Emily, he began gently, can I ask you something? She looked up from her drawing. Okay. Why were you sitting on that bench when I found you? Were you trying to get somewhere? Emily hesitated, her fingers gripping the crayon tightly. I was waiting for my mom to come back, she said softly. Jason's chest tightened. Your mom? Emily nodded. She used to tell me that if we ever got separated, I should wait for her at the bench in Grant Park. But she's been gone for a long time now. Jason swallowed the lump in his throat. Emily, your mom loved you very much. I'm sure she'd want you to be safe. Emily looked down at her drawing. I know. But I didn't know where else to go. Jason placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to figure it out alone anymore. I'm here to help, okay? She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Promise? I promise, Jason said firmly. That afternoon, Jason decided it was time to take Emily out for a little adventure. The weather had warmed up slightly, and the crisp autumn air felt inviting. How about we go to the park? He asked, watching her carefully. Emily's eyes widened. The park? Really? Jason chuckled. Yes, really. We'll get some fresh air, and maybe you can show me your favorite thing to do there. Emily hesitated for a moment, then nodded eagerly. Okay. Jason grabbed her a new jacket Sarah had brought the day before, helping her into it as they prepared to leave. Emily beamed, clearly feeling proud of her warm, stylish coat. Jason couldn't help but smile back. They arrived at Grant Park, the same place where Jason had first seen her sitting alone on the bench. This time, though, she looked completely different and brighter, more alive. Emily ran ahead toward a small play area, her laughter ringing out as she climbed onto a swing. Jason stood nearby, watching as she kicked her legs, trying to go higher. Push me, Mr. Carter, she called out, giggling. Jason walked over, amused by the name she had given him. You can just call me Jason, you know, he said, giving her a gentle push. Emily laughed as the swing moved higher. Okay, Jason, she said, drawing out his name like it was a funny word. They spent the afternoon exploring the park. Emily led Jason to a patch of trees where she pointed out squirrels darting around and showed him a pile of colorful leaves she had collected. "This one looks like a heart," she exclaimed, holding up a perfectly shaped red leaf. Jason took it from her, studying it. "It does," he said with a soft smile. "I think you've got an eye for finding special things." Emily blushed, ducking her head. As the sun began to set, they stopped by a food truck for hot chocolate. Jason handed Emily her cup, and she held it tightly, her small hands warming against the heat. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now as they sat on a bench overlooking the park's pond. "For what?" Jason asked, taking a sip of his own drink. "For everything," Emily replied. "For taking care of me. For being nice." Jason felt a lump in his throat. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. I'm happy to do it." Emily looked down at her cup, then back up at him. "I think my mom would like you," she said softly. Jason's heart clenched at her words. He didn't know much about Emily's mother, but he knew one thing: she had left behind a remarkable little girl. "Well, I think I'd like her too," Jason said gently. Emily smiled, her eyes shining in the fading light. When they returned to the penthouse that evening, Emily was brimming with energy. She carried her collection of leaves proudly, placing them on the coffee table as if they were treasures. "Can we keep them?" she asked. "Of course," Jason said, pulling out a small vase and arranging the leaves inside. "They'll brighten up the place." As Emily yawned, Jason realized how tired she must be after their busy day. "Time for bed, kiddo," he said, scooping her up gently. She giggled, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You're funny, Jason." He carried her to the guest room, tucking her in under the soft blankets. "Good night, Emily," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Good night, Jason," she whispered, her voice drowsy but happy. As Jason turned off the light and stepped out of the room, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. For the first time in years, his life felt fuller, like it had a purpose beyond boardrooms and bank accounts. The next morning, Jason woke to the sound of laughter echoing from the living room. He got up and found Emily sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by crayons, paper, and her teddy bear. She had drawn what looked like a house with two stick figures, one tall and one small. "Good morning, Picasso," Jason said with a grin. Emily giggled, holding up her drawing. "Look, it's you and me." Jason knelt beside her, examining the picture. "You made me look very tall." "I like it," he said, ruffling her hair. As they shared breakfast, Jason's phone buzzed. It was Sarah, his assistant. "Jason, we've got a situation," she said, her tone urgent. Jason stepped into the hallway, lowering his voice. "What's wrong?" "Reporters have camped outside your building. They're asking about the girl, saying she might be tied to a missing child's case. They've even contacted Child Protective Services." Jason's stomach sank. "CPS? Already?" "Yes. They might come by today. You should be prepared." Jason clenched his jaw. "Thanks for the heads up, Sarah." When he returned to the dining area, Emily was busy building a tower with her toast crusts. She looked up at him with a cheerful grin, unaware of the storm brewing outside. "Emily," Jason began, sitting across from her, "I need to talk to you about something important." Her smile faded slightly, and she tilted her head. "Okay. Some people might come by today to ask questions about you, about where you've been and what's happened. They're just trying to make sure you're safe," he explained carefully. Emily's hand stilled, and she hugged her teddy bear closer. "Are they going to take me away?" Jason's chest tightened. "I won't let that happen, Emily. I promise. But I need you to be honest with them if they ask you anything. Can you do that?" She nodded slowly, her eyes wide with worry. Later that afternoon, a knock at the door confirmed Sarah's warning. Jason opened it to find two people standing there, a woman with a clipboard and a man in a suit. "Mr. Carter?" the woman asked. Jason nodded. "That's me. Come in." As they stepped inside, Emily peeked out from behind the couch, her small frame trembling. Jason crouched down, gesturing for her to come over. "This is Emily," he said softly. The woman, who introduced herself as Ms. Daniels from CPS, smiled kindly at Emily. "Hi, Emily. Can we talk to you for a little while?" Emily looked up at Jason, who gave her a reassuring nod. Slowly, she stepped forward, still clutching her bear. Ms. Daniels knelt to Emily's level. "We're just here to make sure you're okay. Can you tell us how you ended up staying with Mr. Carter?" Emily hesitated, glancing at Jason again. "He found me in the park," she said quietly. "I didn't have anywhere else to go." Ms. Daniels nodded, jotting down notes. "And before that? Where were you living?" Emily's voice grew even softer. I was with my mom. But then she went away." Jason stepped in gently. "Emily's mother passed away a few months ago. She's been on her own since then." The man in the suit, who had remained silent, spoke up. "Mr. Carter, you understand that caring for a child without legal guardianship is a complicated matter." Jason straightened. "I understand, but Emily didn't have anyone else. I couldn't just leave her." Ms. Daniels gave him a sympathetic look. "We'll need to conduct an evaluation to determine what's best for Emily. For now, she'll need to come with us until we can assess the situation." Jason's heart sank. "Come with you?" "No, she's just starting to feel safe here." Emily's grip on his hand tightened. "I don't want to go," she cried, tears streaming down her face. Jason knelt beside her, his own voice breaking. "It's going to be okay, Emily. I won't let this be the end, I promise." Ms. Daniels hesitated, clearly moved by the scene. "We'll do our best to keep this process quick and fair, Mr. Carter. But you'll need to cooperate." As Emily was gently escorted out, Jason felt an emptiness settle over him. His once lively penthouse now felt cold and hollow. Determined, he grabbed his phone and dialed Detective Harris. "They've taken her," he said, his voice hard with resolve. "I want to fight this. Find me every legal avenue to bring her back." Emily sat quietly in the back seat of Ms. Daniels' car, hugging Mr. Bear so tightly her knuckles turned white. The car hummed softly as it moved through the city, but Emily barely noticed the tall buildings and bustling streets outside. Her mind was racing with questions. Where were they taking her? Would Jason come for her? Ms. Daniels glanced at Emily in the rearview mirror. "You're very brave, Emily," she said kindly. "We're going to a place where you can stay for a little while, just until we figure things out." Emily didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on Mr. Bear, as if staring at him would make everything else disappear. After a short drive, they pulled up to a small brick building with a colorful sign that read Hope Haven Children's Home. The words felt wrong to Emily. It didn't feel like a home. Inside, Ms. Daniels introduced her to a woman named Mrs. Atkins, a kind-looking lady with short gray hair and warm eyes. "Hello, Emily," Mrs. Atkins said softly. "We're going to take good care of you here." Emily stayed close to Ms. Daniels, her heart pounding as she looked around the room. There were other kids playing with toys, but the laughter and chatter felt far away. She didn't want to play. She didn't want to stay. "This is your bed," Mrs. Atkins said, leading Emily to a small cot in a shared room with 3 other girls. The bed had a thin blanket and a stuffed rabbit sitting on the pillow. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her hands gripping Mr. Bear. "Can I go back to Jason's house?" she asked in a small voice. Mrs. Atkins knelt beside her, patting her hand gently. "Not yet, sweetie. But we'll do everything we can to make you feel comfortable here." Emily nodded, but her heart ached. Jason's house had felt warm and safe. This place, though filled with toys and kids, felt cold and unfamiliar. Over the next few days, Emily tried to adjust, but it wasn't easy. Mealtimes were noisy, and the other kids were nice enough, but Emily didn't feel like she belonged. She missed the quiet moments in Jason's penthouse, the way he had smiled at her drawings, and the sound of his voice when he promised everything would be okay. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Emily sat by the window in her room, looking out at the stars. She hugged Mr. Bear close and whispered, "Jason, please don't forget about me." The days dragged on, and Emily found herself feeling lonelier with each passing moment. The other children at Hope Haven had their own stories, their own wounds, but Emily didn't feel ready to share hers. She spent most of her time drawing pictures of the life she had with Jason, the big windows of his penthouse, the pancakes he had made, and the heart-shaped leaf she had found in the park. Mrs. Atkins noticed Emily's sadness and tried to help. "Would you like to join the art class?" she asked one afternoon, kneeling beside Emily. Emily shook her head. "I just want to go home." Mrs. Atkins smiled gently. "Sometimes it takes a little while to figure out where home is, Emily. But I promise, we're all doing our best to help you find it." Meanwhile, whispers among the staff at Hope Haven reached Emily's ears. "That's the girl staying with Jason Carter," one of the workers said. "He's fighting to get her back." Hearing this made Emily's heart leap. She didn't understand what a legal battle was, but she knew Jason wouldn't just leave her here. One evening, as she sat in the common area, a boy named Tommy approached her. He was about her age, with messy blonde hair and a gap-toothed grin. "You're the girl with the rich guy, right?" he asked bluntly. Emily frowned. "Jason isn't just rich. He's nice." Tommy shrugged, sitting down beside her. "My parents left me with a nice neighbor once. They didn't come back." Emily hugged Mr. Bear tighter. "Jason will come back," she said firmly. Tommy tilted his head, studying her. "You really believe that?" "Yes," Emily said without hesitation. Tommy smirked. "Well, I hope he does. This place isn't so bad, but it's not a home." As the days stretched into weeks, Emily clung to the hope that Jason would find her. Every time a visitor arrived at Hope Haven, she sat up straighter, her heart pounding with anticipation. But each time, it wasn't Jason. One rainy afternoon, as Emily sat by the window tracing patterns on the glass, Mrs. Atkins approached her with a smile. "Emily, you have a visitor." Emily's heart soared. Could it finally be him? She jumped to her feet and rushed to the front room. Standing there, soaked from the rain but with a determined look in his eyes, was Jason. "Jason!" Emily cried, running to him. He knelt down, opening his arms as she crashed into him, holding him tightly. "I told you I'd come for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily didn't let go. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you too," Jason replied, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "And I'm not going to let them take you away from me again." Jason stood in the office of his attorney, Michelle Harper, a sharp and determined woman with years of experience in family law. The rain outside mirrored the storm brewing in Jason's mind as Michelle shuffled through the file on Emily's case. "This isn't going to be easy, Jason," Michelle said, looking up from the stack of papers. "The foster system has its rules, and while your intentions are good, the court will want to see more than that." Jason's jaw tightened. "I don't just have good intentions, Michelle. I'm ready to give Emily a stable home, one where she feels safe and loved." "Isn't that what they want for her?" Michelle sighed. "It is, but the law is the law. You're not related to Emily, and she wasn't placed in your care through official channels. The court will question why you took her in without contacting the authorities. They'll want to know if you're capable of handling the responsibilities of being her guardian." Jason leaned forward, his eyes fierce. She was alone. She had no one. I couldn't just leave her there. You know that. Michelle nodded. "I understand, and we'll use that in your case. But there's another complication. The foster system sees this as an interference in their process. They might argue that returning her to you could set a precedent they don't want." Jason exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "What do I need to do?" Michelle gave him a measured look. You need to prove that you can provide Emily with not just a home, but the emotional and financial stability she needs. That means background checks, interviews, and evaluations from social workers. They'll scrutinize your life, Jason. Everything, from your business dealings to your personal relationships, will be on trial. Jason didn't flinch. Fine. I'll do whatever it takes. Michelle's lips curved into a faint smile. Good. Because we'll also need to show the court that Emily's best interests lie with you. That means we'll need statements from people who've seen you with her, testimonials that prove she's thriving under your care. Jason straightened. I'll get them. Anyone who's seen me with Emily knows how much she means to me. Over the next few weeks, Jason threw himself into preparing for the custody hearing. He submitted to every background check and interview without hesitation, answering every question about his intentions and his ability to care for Emily. Social workers visited his penthouse, observing the space he had prepared for her, complete with a cozy bedroom filled with books, toys, and drawings she had left behind. Jason explained how he had ensured her needs were met, from meals to emotional support. "I've never cared about anything as much as I care about Emily," he said during one interview. Still, the opposition was fierce. Representatives from the foster system argued that Emily belonged in a structured environment designed for children in need, not with a billionaire who had acted impulsively. In one particularly tense meeting, an attorney for the foster system leaned forward, his tone skeptical. "Mr. Carter, you're a businessman. How do you expect to provide the constant attention and care a child like Emily requires?" Jason didn't hesitate. "I've already adjusted my schedule to prioritize Emily. I've hired professionals to assist with her education and well-being. But more importantly, I've made a promise to her, and I don't break my promises." The attorney raised an eyebrow. "And how do we know this isn't just a temporary whim? A wealthy man's act of charity?" Jason's eyes narrowed. "This isn't charity. This is about love. Emily deserves someone who's willing to fight for her, and that's exactly what I'm doing." As the hearing approached, Michelle called Jason into her office. "We have one more hurdle," she said, sliding a file across the desk. Jason opened it, his stomach sinking as he saw the name on the first page, Angela Harper, Emily's mother. "I didn't know she had family," Jason said, confused. "She doesn't," Michelle explained. "But Angela's history might complicate things. She had a troubled past, including brushes with the law. The foster system could argue that Emily's challenges stem from her upbringing and use that to suggest she needs professional care rather than placement with you." Jason frowned, flipping through the pages. "That's not fair. Angela did her best, and Emily is nothing like what these files suggest. She's kind, bright, and full of potential." "I know," Michelle said. "And we'll make sure the court sees that. But you'll need to be ready to defend not just your actions, but Emily's worth as an individual. They might try to reduce her to her circumstances, and we can't let that happen." The day of the hearing finally arrived. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Jason sat beside Michelle, his heart pounding. Emily wasn't present. She was back at Hope Haven, unaware of the battle being fought on her behalf. Witnesses took the stand, including social workers and staff from the foster system who argued their case with practiced precision. Then it was Jason's turn. He stood, his shoulders squared, as Michelle guided him through his testimony. "When I found Emily, she was sitting alone in the cold, clutching a teddy bear," Jason said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "She wasn't just a child in need. She was a little girl who had lost everything, and yet, she still had hope. That hope is why I'm standing here today. She's not just a responsibility to me. She's family." As he spoke, he saw several people in the courtroom exchange glances. He hoped his words were reaching them, cutting through the legal jargon to show them the truth. But the foster system's attorney wasn't finished. He stood, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Carter, you claim to care deeply for Emily, but isn't it true that you've only known her for a few weeks? How can you possibly understand what she truly needs?" Jason didn't waver. I've known her long enough to know she needs love, stability, and someone who believes in her. That's all she's ever asked for, and that's what I'll give her." The attorney smirked. "And what happens when the next business deal or project demands your attention? Will Emily still be your priority?" Jason's voice hardened. "Emily isn't just a priority. She's my heart." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The courtroom was silent as the judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, shuffled through her notes. Jason sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands clasped tightly together. He kept his gaze steady, though his heart pounded like a drum. Across the room, the foster system's representatives whispered among themselves, their expressions unreadable. Michelle leaned over to Jason, whispering, "No matter what happens, you've done everything you can." Jason nodded slightly, but the words felt hollow. Everything wasn't enough unless Emily came home with him. The judge cleared her throat, and everyone's attention snapped to her. After reviewing the evidence and hearing testimonies from both sides, this court has reached a decision regarding the placement of Emily Harper, she began, her voice steady but firm. Jason felt his breath hitch. The child welfare system has raised valid concerns about the unconventional circumstances under which Mr. Carter took Emily into his care, the judge continued. The foster system's structure exists to ensure the well-being of children like Emily, and its protocols are not to be disregarded lightly. Jason's grip tightened on the edge of the table. However, the judge said, her tone softening, this court also recognizes that no system is perfect. While the foster care representatives have argued for structure and protocol, the testimonies provided suggest that Emily has found stability and emotional support in Mr. Carter's care. A faint murmur rippled through the room, but the judge held up a hand to silence it. Emily's best interests must come first, she said. The evidence shows that Mr. Carter has not only provided for her materially, but has also demonstrated a genuine commitment to her emotional and psychological well-being. This court is persuaded that his actions, while unconventional, were motivated by her safety and care, not by self-interest. Jason felt a flicker of hope, but he didn't dare move. Therefore, the judge said, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, custody of Emily Harper is awarded to Mr. Jason Carter, with the understanding that he will work with child services to ensure a smooth transition and provide regular updates on her well-being. The words hit Jason like a wave. For a moment, he couldn't move. Then Michelle nudged him, and he rose to his feet, his voice catching as he said, "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge gave him a pointed look. "Mr. Carter, this is a great responsibility. Emily has been through more than any child should endure. I trust you'll honor the commitment you've made to her." "I will," Jason said firmly. "I promise." As the judge exited the courtroom, Jason let out a shaky breath, turning to Michelle. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief and relief. Michelle smiled. "No, Jason. You did it." The foster system's representatives gathered their things, some looking less than pleased, but others nodding in quiet approval. Jason didn't linger. He stepped out of the courtroom, pulling out his phone. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed the number for Hope Haven. "Hello," came Mrs. Atkins' voice on the other end. "Mrs. Atkins, it's Jason Carter," he said quickly. "I'm coming to get Emily." There was a pause, followed by a warm laugh. "I had a feeling you'd be calling soon," Mrs. Atkins said. "She's been waiting for you." Jason didn't waste a second. He and Michelle drove straight to Hope Haven, the city passing by in a blur. When they arrived, Jason practically ran up the steps, his heart racing. Mrs. Atkins greeted him at the door with a smile. "She's in the playroom," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Jason walked through the hallways, his steps quick and purposeful. When he reached the playroom, he saw her, Emily, sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring a picture of what looked like a house. "Emily," he called softly. Her head shot up, and her eyes widened. "Jason," she cried, dropping her crayons and running toward him. Jason knelt down, opening his arms just in time to catch her as she launched herself at him. She clung to him tightly, burying her face in his shoulder. "I knew you'd come," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Jason held her close, his own eyes damp. "I told you I'd never leave you," he said, his voice thick. "You're coming home, Emily. For good this time." Jason carried Emily into the penthouse, her laughter filling the space as she clung to his neck. For the first time in weeks, the cold, empty apartment felt warm and alive. Emily's eyes widened as she noticed the changes Jason had made in her absence. "Is that my room?" she asked, pointing to the door he had painted bright yellow. Jason smiled. "Go see for yourself." Emily slid down from his arms and ran to the door, throwing it open. Inside, the room was transformed, a cozy bed with colorful blankets, shelves filled with books, and a large teddy bear sitting in the corner. On the walls were her drawings from before, framed and displayed like treasures. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice full of awe. Jason leaned against the doorframe, his heart swelling at her reaction. "It's all yours, kiddo. This is your home now." The days that followed were a flurry of new routines and adjustments. Jason worked hard to balance his professional life with his newfound role as a guardian. Mornings started with pancakes, Emily's favorite, and evenings ended with bedtime stories. Emily blossomed in her new environment. She enrolled in a nearby school, where she quickly made friends, and Jason made sure to be present for every important moment: school drop-offs, parent-teacher meetings, and her first art fair, where she proudly displayed a painting of her and Jason under a heart-shaped tree. One rainy afternoon, as they sat on the couch watching cartoons, Emily turned to Jason, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think my mom would be happy?" she asked softly. Jason put an arm around her, pulling her close. "I think she'd be proud of you, Emily. You're strong, kind, and brave. I think she'd be happy knowing you're loved." Emily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I think so too." As the months passed, their bond grew deeper. Jason learned to see the world through Emily's eyes, finding joy in small things, like chasing bubbles in the park or baking cookies that didn't always turn out perfect. And Emily learned to trust again, her laughter coming more freely, her smiles brighter. One sunny morning, as they played in the garden, Emily paused, looking up at Jason with a serious expression. "You saved me," she said simply. Jason knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his. "No, Emily. You saved me," he replied. She tilted her head, confused. "How?" Jason smiled. "Before I met you, my life was all about work. I didn't know what it meant to really care for someone. You taught me how to love, how to slow down, and how to be better." Emily hugged him tightly, and Jason closed his eyes, savoring the moment.
Now, if you think this content is nice, share to those friends who need this, and please like and subscribe for more inspiring stories.